following Casual Chats is brought to you by oldschoollane.blogspot.com and is associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, the Comic Book Cast, and the Reopened Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando, Florida Facebook page. Welcome to a brand new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia, and I'm here with two very special guests who are working on this really cool documentary called Happy Happy Joy Joy, the Ren Stimpy Story. We have the shooter and the director of the film. We have Kimo Easterwood. Welcome, Kimo.
Thank you.
And we have the writer and producer of the documentary. We have Ren Cicero. Welcome, Ron.
Well, thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.
So, right before we delve more into the documentary, I'd like to know from the both of you, what was your earliest memory of Ren and Stimpy? So, Kimo, why don't we start with you?
Earliest memory, to be quite honest, was just before we started this documentary, which was about a year ago. I never watched the show growing up. In the 90s, it just wasn't part of my life. So I never actually watched my first episode until we decided to take this project on, which was about a year ago. So unfortunately, I don't have some great nostalgic story for you, but that's when I started watching it.
Wow, that's actually pretty interesting.
I guess you could say that.
I mean, for the most part, for a lot of people who decide to tackle in such a subject, they would probably, have like a long history with it. But it's actually pretty interesting to know about a person who's just tackling in such a big project and knowing about it recently. So yeah, that's very fascinating. So Ron, how about you?
Yeah, I was certainly aware of it. I'm probably a little bit older than many of the folks in your audience. And so I had just graduated college when Ren and Stimpy came out. So I was certainly aware of it from some of my buddies that were younger. But again, I wasn't like a massive fan either. But I think one of the reasons why Kimo and I jumped into this is because exactly that. It was a subject we didn't know much about. And our friend Todd White, who was a character designer on SpongeBob, brought up the idea of doing the documentary. And it's like, wow, this is an amazing opportunity to learn about something that had a huge social impact on pop culture, on music, just a wide range of popular influences. And so that's how we dove into the project. And it's been a fascinating adventure for the last year.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting, considering that, just in more recent years, a lot of Nickelodeon programs have gotten adaptations on books or documentaries like the one that you guys are doing. So out of all the shows to do a documentary on, why Ren and Stimpy?
Well, not being fans, we're fans of stories. And so when we started to look into Ren and Stimpy as a possible documentary, and just when we started doing research and all the online stuff, we started to realize that there was a story here. And that's basically why we decided to take it on, even though we both weren't animation fans. Like I said, we're fans of great stories, and we felt that this would be a great story to tell. And as documentary filmmakers, it's so hard to find subject that somebody hasn't done already. And we couldn't believe that nobody had tackled this story before, so we jumped right on it.
Yeah, there have been, out of all the shows to have like a really interesting backstory, definitely Ren and Stimpy is one of the most interesting, I have to say. There was a book that was released a few years ago called Sick Little Monkeys, The Unauthorized Ren and Stimpy Story by Thad Komorowski. And he delved into the behind-the-scenes stories from the writers and the animators and the producers and the directors. And yeah, it would be really nice to see a documentary version of that, because I've always felt that a story like that must be told in a bigger medium.
Yeah, Thad's book is great. He definitely spent a lot of time. It's very well written. I think one of the things that'll separate the film from the book, if you will, is that we are really looking at why Ren and Stimpy was such an important turning point artistically in animation and television comedy. We really kind of steer away from the behind-the-scenes production drama. We're going to cover it. That has to be part of the story, but we're really looking at it as somebody that appreciates great storytelling and cinematic craft.
Right. And possibly for maybe our younger listeners who may not know about, what happened to animation before Ren and Stimpy, would you like to give like a brief synopsis on that?
Yeah, so what happened so it was launched in, 91, and John Kricfalusi, who was the creator of the show and spent years pitching it, it was eventually taken up by a young upstart network called Nickelodeon. And just to give a little history, you have to realize Nickelodeon was on cable, and cable was like what the internet is today. It was a brand new kind of medium. And so they were taking chances. They were taking risks on animation. John went in, pitched Vanessa Coffey. Vanessa took the chance. She really was a big cheerleader for the show, and they ordered 6 episodes. And the show was an instant hit. It really caught something. The craft was amazing. It harkened back to the Bob Clampett cartoons of the 1940s and 50s. So from a visual standpoint, it was extraordinary. The humor was both childlike and adult. The music was incredible. So it was really this breakthrough cartoon. And then John, because he was such a perfectionist, had a hard time delivering the cartoon on time, and that's death in TV. You had advertisers that are paying to put their message on the cartoon, and new episodes weren't coming. So after a protracted battle of back and forth, John and Nickelodeon parted ways. Several of the artists that started with John kept on, and they produced another, about 3 seasons. And so the production drama was the divorce that happened amongst the Ren and Stimpy family. You had a very tight-knit group of artists and writers and directors, and they were split. Some stayed with Nickelodeon to continue producing the series, and others went off with John Kay at his company called Spumco. So it was really there was a lot of drama. There was a lot of drama in the press. It got pretty ugly for a long time. And in fact, here it is 25 years later, and some of the guys are just now starting to talk to each other. It was very tumultuous.
Yeah, I think that a friend of mine who's a writer of various pop culture books named Cassine Gaines, he had written various books. The first one that he ever written was called Inside Pee-wee's Playhouse. And it's funny because you would think that a groundbreaking kid show like Pee-wee's Playhouse, you would have like a lot of inside behind-the-scenes stories, but the people who had worked on the show hadn't talked about it until after the show was over. Maybe for a lot of people, they wouldn't care about, the behind-the-scenes stories of a particular show or a movie. They just care about the show itself or the movie itself. But knowing that it has garnered a massive following over the decades, and it's become one of the most critically acclaimed and highly influential animated show that came out over the past 30 years, definitely that a lot of people would be interested in knowing about how did this happen? How did these groups of animators who are frustrated by the strict rules of producing cartoons in the 70s and 80s, in which it was nothing but releasing cartoons about toys or action figures or movies or celebrities, they went on and helped create an original cartoon, not just a huge fan for kids, but adults liked it, and teenagers liked it, and it gained a massive following. And it garnered more views than the other 2 Nicktoons that aired around the same time, Rugrats and Doug combined. So it definitely shows that people are interested in learning about it, and it's nice to know that the people who have worked on the show are willing to talk about it via your documentary.
Yeah, well, that's part of the what people don't understand also is that show came out when there wasn't anything like it, and that's why the show was so groundbreaking, because everything prior to it, like you said, was just about toy commercials and that kind of thing, and it was just horrible animation, and they were, just not spending a lot of time doing quality product. And so when this show came along, the timing was just so perfect. Nickelodeon was looking for a show. John had a show. There was nothing like it, and they really loved what they did, and they put all their hearts into making this show, and that's why it's just so groundbreaking.
Yeah, definitely. So, because the both of you really love the stories that were presented in Ren and Stimpy, what would you say would be your personal favorite episodes?
Oh, that's a tough question. There's so many good ones.
Yeah, Son of Stimpy is my personal favorite, just because it has just gorgeous artwork by Bill Ray in it, and the storyline, the fact that it's such a ridiculous storyline, but it's it has made some people cry. It's like one of the standout episodes that actually has brought tears to some people's eyes. So just the emotional content of it, and the juxtaposition of how silly something can be, but made so emotional, and just with beautiful artwork and music. It's just, that's my personal favorite.
That's a great one. Yeah. I would say probably Ren's Toothache, just because it's a little harsher, but it's just so visceral. I mean, you cannot help but watch it, and it's hard to you can't help but watch it and cringe and really feel for that character. And it's so weird, because you're like, I'm watching a drawing that's moving. I shouldn't have this type of reaction to just a line drawing, essentially. I mean, it's a cartoon, but it's not like you're watching a live action or a film. It's just so extraordinary how much, both in Ren's Toothache and Son of Stimpy, that you're really moved by these characters.
Wow, those are really interesting choices, absolutely. My personal favorite has always been Space Madness, because I just love the way that Ren's emotions are able to go all over the place, and also and of course you have the iconic moment with Stimpy with the history eraser button. So yeah, that's my favorite episode.
Yeah, that's a good one too. They are definitely hard to choose from, because they all have their own little, I guess, little bits that you love. But yeah, for me, Son of Stimpy as an overall piece, for sure.
Sure. So finally, when you decided to do the documentary, what was the process of getting started?
Process of getting started was basically just tracking down people that were involved in the show. Going to like IMDb pages, looking at who was involved. And then starting, Ron has a giant blackboard in his room, which is literally like 9 feet tall, and we just started writing on it, just people that we thought we would interview, and we just started collecting names, and basically a bunch of just online research. We just both hunkered down and just started to pull names of who worked on what, and who was related, and then where they lived, and then who was accessible, and all that kind of stuff. And that was basically the process. And then from there, we just started our first interview, which was with Jerry Beck, because he actually lives about a mile from me. So we contacted him, and he's an animation historian. And so we just started with him. We said, well, we're just going to start with him and see what happens. And that was basically our first interview. And we just started booking people after that.
Yeah, it's interesting to your earlier point about the production Discord, reaching out to some of those people initially, like Bill Ray or Vince Waller, Chris Riccardi. Those were, there was a number of people like that were critical to the show's success. And those were some of the people that actually called us back initially. There was a whole other group of people that were like Lynn Naylor and others, not to throw them under the bus, but they didn't even respond, because so many people just had such a bad taste in their mouth after the split that they weren't even getting back to me. And the people that did were like, well, let's talk on the phone first. Why are you doing this documentary? And are you going to really, push into the production Discord and drudge up all these memories? And is it going to be a hit piece? And, a lot of the folks were asking those kinds of questions. And we had to constantly reassure them, like, look, we're doing this because we really want to spotlight the creative achievement that is Ren and Stimpy. The Discord has been well reported. Fortunately, it shined the spotlight away from the more interesting story. As Kimo said, that's always rough to find as documentarians, and that is, Ren and Stimpy as this work of pop art.
Right, and of course, I can completely understand if a lot of these people do not want to get back to you discussing about their rough experiences with John Kay. I mean, trust me, from looking at various interviews and reading the book, it's not without question that John Kay, even though that he was a perfectionist and he was trying to create a show that he wanted to do, wasn't a very easy person to work with. So I can understand that they didn't want to open up old wounds.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is they were family. And several of those guys, like Jim Gomez, went to school with John back in the Sheridan days at Sheridan College. So they knew each other, when they were 16, 17 years old. Then they find success. They're all really excited because they feel like, oh, my God, this is our big shot. We have these screenings and these amazing actors and musicians are showing up just because they love Ren and Stimpy. And we're really, starting to become, as John would call them, big shots. And then all of a sudden it all went away. And, they kind of felt like the captain of the ship, even though they were indebted to him, didn't steer the ship as he was supposed to. He kind of ran into an iceberg. And so I think there was just a lot of disappointment, and that festered itself in a variety of different ways.
Right, definitely. It can be really hard because, with John Kay, he, from what I've been reading in various books, he always felt like he was the one in charge and everybody else was just like second best. Nobody can do it as good as he did. Every time that somebody drew, he said, here's the same drawing, but you can do it better. Voice actors would be the same, in which they would be there for like 8 hours screaming their heads off, turning red, almost fainting, breaking up a sweat. It's insane. But, of course, I can completely understand with everybody just wondering about, in the end, who was really responsible for Ren and Stimpy, of how it turned out. And a lot of people give credit to John Kay, but in a sense, when it comes to anything, if it's a big project, everybody is a part of it. They are all the lifeblood in different various ways. You have the animators, you have the writers, you have the storyboard artists, you have the producers, you have the directors. So, and the voice actors, everybody is a part of it. Sure, it may say in the intro and in the top bill that John Kricfalusi was the creator of Ren and Stimpy, but I like to think that in some ways, everybody was a part of it, and they worked just as hard as John Kay to create something like this. Similar to how, with you and, Ron, you guys are working on the documentary, but I'm sure there are plenty of other people who are involved with it. All the people that you've interviewed, the people who've done, maybe the lighting or the editing or whatever, everybody's a part of this.
Yeah, well, it's definitely... Tia Wang had said that she thought that if John could have done this entire show himself, he probably would have. But it's just impossible. Nowadays, you can create a cartoon on your own in your house, but back then, it's just impossible. There's so many departments involved, and so he had no choice. But yeah, and to our account, we're bringing some of the old people back. So some of the people that did the music and the sound, we're bringing those guys back. We're doing some custom animation. So we're definitely relying on a bunch of people to help tell our story.
Right.
We're also, if we can plug this shamelessly, we're also relying on the fans because we are going to do a Kickstarter on July 10th. And that is in order to give back to some of the original artists. You know, a lot of those guys, they made as we said, a fair wage, but they didn't necessarily get rich off of it because they didn't own the show. So some of them in particular could use the work, and so that's why we're raising the money. And we also feel that they can do an amazing job, of course, on the animation and adding a lot to the film as well. So I think this documentary is going to surprise a lot of people. And I think certainly if they're big fans, they're going to want to get involved earlier than later.
Oh, absolutely. The day that the podcast will be posted, I'll leave a link on the description box below the day that the Kickstarter is launched.
Oh, that'd be great. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
That's not a problem at all. So, out of all the people that you've interviewed, I mean, I know this is like choosing a favorite child, but who is your favorite?
Well, I would have to say, I think Doug Lawrence for me. He goes by Mr. Lawrence. I would say he was my favorite just because he had so many great points of view, and he gave us such a great interview. He talked. He was one of our longer ones. We did 2 hours with him, and he had so much usable footage that we're just not going to be able to use because it's only going to be an hour, and a half documentary. So, but I think for me it was Doug Lawrence. We just both walked out of that interview going, wow, that was one of the best interviews we've ever done. So, that'd be my choice.
Yeah, that is a really hard question because so many people gave us, it was like literally like building a diamond, like each little facet of the diamond was created during each interview. And, Matt Kennedy was somebody that wasn't involved in the show, but he is a curator at a pop art gallery here in Los Angeles. And he just gave an amazing perspective on why Ren and Stimpy can be seen as a true piece of pop art right alongside a Warhol or a Banksy. And I mean, it was a really interesting insight. And again, with all these guys like Bill Ray and Chris Riccardi and Lynn Naylor and Bill Ray, like each one of them gave this just amazing insight. I think we ended up with about 45 interviews?
Yeah.
And about 70 hours worth of footage. So we really are indebted to these guys and gals.
Well, that's why they have deleted scenes for a reason. So, yeah, without giving away, like, a massive spoiler to the documentary, what are some of the things that you're going to cover about Ren and Stimpy that, personally, that you haven't seen presented in a book like Sick Little Monkeys or Slimed in Oral History, or maybe Not Just Cartoons, Nicktoons, or various interviews that were presented on TV or on newspaper articles that were done at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're going to see here is a perspective on Ren and Stimpy that really has not even been considered before. And that part of it I touched on already, on how Ren and Stimpy really is a piece of pop art, and why it's just as an important piece of art as a Rembrandt or any other piece of art that's known as, quote, fine art. And I don't want to give it away, but I think, it's certainly not dry, and it's really fascinating to see how a cartoon that a lot of people go, well, they dismiss it like a gross out cartoon. And it's so much more than that. And it's had a tremendous effect on a lot of people's lives, including several celebrities that we've interviewed and who we can't necessarily name, but will be in the film. And I think you're going to see that it's a pretty remarkable piece of American pop culture.
Yeah, and I would say there's just personal stories, that haven't been told. There's the first apartment that these guys basically created the show in. There's stories of that, and Ren and Stimpy was also in right when the LA riots happened. So we have some perspective of what it was like to, be at the Spumco offices when the LA riots were just down the street and buildings were burning. So we have those kind of stories. So, just personal stories and sort of like the behind the scenes day to day of what it was like working there.
Okay. Now, I'm sure for a lot of people, they're going to be really curious because you are talking about Ren and Stimpy. Is there going to be any mentions of Adult Party Cartoon?
Yes, there will be mentions of it.
Okay. Okay, we won't go any further than that. So, yeah, I guess we can wrap things up. I guess, final question right before we go. When looking back on... Now, last year, Ren and Stimpy celebrated its 25th anniversary. And Nickelodeon did this huge celebration with having a lot of the people behind Ren and Stimpy talking about various stories and stuff like that. I mean, and of course, a lot of people are giving their respects and praises to Ren and Stimpy. Now, how do you see the legacy of Ren and Stimpy?
I just see it. God, that's a hard one. We actually asked people the same question. That was one of our questions that we would basically ask everybody. But it's just one of those things that was like lightning in a bottle that came and it just ushered in this new era of what could be. I don't know. I'm going to start stammering here pretty soon.
Well, you know what? Well, I'll ape David Silverman's answer.
Good.
So David was an early director on The Simpsons, and we asked him that question, and he said, "You know what? You have to look at any piece of artwork from the legacy of that piece of artwork as to what was the influence on other artists, not only in that medium but elsewhere." And one of the things that you're going to see happen in the film is us really connecting the dots on how many different types of art and types of popular culture were influenced by Ren and Stimpy. And so Ren and Stimpy's influence and legacy isn't just the cartoon, but it's a number of different artistic endeavors.
Yeah, actually, Chris Riccardi said, too, he said, look, if you take away the Beatles and Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, what are you left with? Like what would the world be like without those bands? What would music sound like? And so I guess I would say that's how I feel about it. Is if you took away Ren and Stimpy, what would be cartoons now? Without that influence. So I guess that's the most uneloquent way I can put that.
Sure. I mean, it's kind of hard to think about what would animation be without Ren and Stimpy. I mean, sure. I mean, we did have The Simpsons that came out around 1989, and it was basically like it basically what many people say it helped. Kickstart prime television for animation, and also this was around the Disney Renaissance happened around that time, with like The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and so on and so forth. But the argument could say about that, The Simpsons was never meant to be a show for kids; it was supposed to be a show for adults. But and also with Disney. It also could be the argument that, they're just adapting from, classic stories. But with Ren and Stimpy, it was something completely original. It brought back old animation tricks that hadn't been done since, like, the Looney Tunes and Hanna-Barbera days, in which it involved with, like, traditional storyboarding and going over the script and helping and interacting with the voice actor, letting them know about this and that, and having creative control over your property, as opposed to having to fight to get the rights to a pre-existing character or base it off a toy or an action figure or what have you. So, all the shows that are out today, such as, all the shows that we have on Adult Swim, Adventure Time, or even SpongeBob, it wouldn't be possible without Ren and Stimpy.
Yeah, I think the show brought back, in a really strong way, this idea that cartoons aren't just for children. And, like The Simpsons was more geared towards an adult audience, or was from almost the very beginning. But Ren and Stimpy brought back this idea that you can have a kid's cartoon and embedded within it is this adult humor. And it wasn't too long after that where you saw the success of films like Toy Story and others, where there was that, kind of dual purpose. And that hadn't been seen for years and years.
Right. So, yeah, I think that we can leave it off into the note of Ren and Stimpy, whether you like it or not, whether you think it's just a regular gross out cartoon, just remember that its importance in animation and in our pop culture is highly significant. Without it, the industry would be completely different than what it is now.
I agree.
All right, I guess that we can wrap things up. So, guys, I know you already discussed about the documentary, but where can people find you at, and where can we learn more about the documentary?
Yeah, so if you go to Facebook, and our page for the film is facebook.com/Ren and Stimpy Doc, so DOC, is where you'll find updates on the film. You'll see the Kickstarter. You'll see some advanced interviews and trailers and stills, and there's a whole repository of things from the film. And check it out. We're also featuring some fan art, so we're asking fans if they have some Ren and Stimpy inspired art to please send it along. So facebook.com/Ren and Stimpy Doc.
All right, and where can people find you at?
Find me. Well, I'm not on. I guess just Facebook, because I don't do Twitter or any of that stuff.
Oh, so, Instagram.
Yeah, so I guess Instagram.
What's your Instagram at?
KimoPix, so KIMOPIX.
Okay.
That would be the best way. And then also on Facebook, if you do Happy Joy, you can find us there as well.
Okay, great. And Ron, do you have social media pages you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Facebook, where I'm trying to build my Twitter following, so at Ron Cicero.
Okay, great. Yeah. So once again, Ron, Kimo, thank you so much for coming on by. I really do appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And that should be it for this episode. Let us know in the comments below about your thoughts on Ren and Stimpy, and if you are really excited on checking out the Ren and Stimpy documentary. That's it. Hope to see you around soon, and thank you for listening.